This is alert 3. Crash. This is alert 3. Crash. This is alert 3. 2 helicopters. Helicopter CRJ approaching runway 33.
It was probably out in the middle of the river. I just saw a fireball and then it was just gone.
That was the scene just before 9 o'clock Wednesday evening when an American Airlines jet and a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter collided in mid-air near the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. On board that flight from Wichita, Kansas to Washington, D.C. were 60 passengers and 4 crew members. 3 soldiers, meanwhile, were in the helicopter. Officials say that none are expected to be found alive. Among the passengers on board were several figure skaters along with their family members and coaches. According to the Skating Club of Boston, they were returning from a development camp that followed the U.S. Figure Skating Championships in Wichita last week. Taking a live look at the scene right now, as of Thursday afternoon, both of those aircraft are still in the river. The plane split apart into 3 main sections and the helicopter was found upside down. At least 28 bodies have been pulled from the water, and officials say that the water temperature and wind have been making recovery efforts difficult. Officials and rescue workers with the FAA, the NTSB, Coast Guard, DC Police, and the Army Corps of Engineers are all on scene to assist in the recovery and investigation. But now I want to bring in Nexstar Washington correspondent Vinay Simlot, who joins us live from Ronald Reagan National Airport with the latest on this recovery. Vinay, what can you tell us?
Zach, a shocking scene here at Reagan National Airport this morning. About 20 million people use this airport every year, and almost every member of Congress flies back home to their district from this airport. Now, the Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy says he believes both the airplane and the helicopter were flying standard routes, but something went wrong.
We are a country of we are in mourning.
The flash over the Potomac River shows the deadly crash of an American Airlines flight and a military helicopter.
We do know that you had 2 planes at the same level. You had a helicopter and a plane. That shouldn't have happened.
Both President Donald Trump and Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy say the crash could have been avoided, but wouldn't say why. The American Airlines CRJ 700, operated by PSA Airlines, was on final approach to Reagan National Airport. The Transportation Secretary says on a normal flight path. The military helicopter, Secretary Duffy says, was also flying a standard flight path, and the helicopter knew the passenger plane was there. The American Airlines CEO says the commercial flight crew was experienced.
We don't know why the military aircraft came into the path of the PSA aircraft.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth says the military crew was also experienced on a yearly nighttime training flight.
We anticipate that the investigation will quickly be able to determine whether the aircraft was in the corridor and at the right altitude at the time of the incident.
D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser says the NTSB is now leading the investigation. In southwest Washington, D.C., police cruisers escorted the vans from the recovery site. From a crash, D.C. fire officials believe nobody survived.
All right, Vinay Simlot there at Reagan National Airport for us. Thanks so much for your reporting. President Donald Trump has been in office for just over 1 week, and in that time, executive orders have been flying off his desk. From a war on DEI in the government to pardons for January 6th rioters and sweeping immigration policies, we're beginning to see what these next 4 years will look like under the Trump administration. The Hill's national political reporter and author of the 1230 Report, Cate Martel, is here to break down Trump's first 100 days through it all. And Cate is joining us now with the latest. Cate, it's great to see you. So let's break down where we are now in these first 100 days, about a week into this new administration.
Yeah, Zach, it's crazy to think we are only 10 days into the second Trump administration, and we have seen a flurry of action. Now, so far, we can tell that this is a very different administration from the first Trump administration because, for good or for bad, he knows what he's doing. He's a political veteran at this point, and he was able to hit the ground running. Now, in the past week, we saw on Capitol Hill 2 legislative wins for the president. He was able to confirm 7 cabinet nominees, and he was also able to pass and sign into law his first legislative victory, an immigration act, that's the Laken-Riley Act. Now, as far as 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, there has been a flurry of executive orders. We saw him clear out a number of inspectors general. We saw a lot of DOJ prosecutors were let go. He also made significant changes at the U.S. military. He froze a lot of foreign assistance, and most notably, he ordered a freeze on nearly all federal assistance. We did see that rescinded, but that caused a major stir over the past few days, Zach.
Yeah, you mentioned there that Laken-Riley Act bill signing ceremony. When we saw the president take the stage to announce this bill signing, we also saw him announce a new immigration policy. Let's take a listen.
Today, I'm also signing an executive order to instruct the Departments of Defense and Homeland Security to begin preparing the 30,000-person migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay. Most people don't even know about it.
Will migrants be separated from prisoners that are already being held, and how many is the administration planning to house here?
Well, first, the administration is planning to house up to 30,000 migrants. Now, this is actually just an expansion of the current project. You know, as it stands, Guantanamo Bay does have a separate migrant processing facility. So there's actually only about 15 prisoners left at Guantanamo Bay because the Biden administration had been trying to wind down the program.
Let's talk about the Pentagon. The Defense Intelligence Agency has announced this week that it's going to pause observances of multiple cultural and historical annual events. Tell us more. What's impacted here?
Yeah, well, Zach, at least 11 major cultural days will be impacted, most notably Black History Month, which is going to be starting this upcoming weekend. We're also going to see National Hispanic Heritage Month will be affected, as well as Pride Month, Martin Luther King Day, Juneteenth, and a whole host of other cultural events. Now, I think what's important to point out here, though, is this is just the observances. It does mention in the memo that it will not affect national holidays, just the observances to some of these events.
Also wanted to ask you about Trump's plan to halt federal aid. This has been a whirlwind few days since that Monday night memo from OMB came out, but now the White House has been seeming to reverse course, rescinding that memo. But then we got that statement from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. She said on X, quote, "This is not a rescission of the federal funding freeze." She said it's simply a rescission of the memo. So where are we at now, and what is the administration looking to clarify here?
Where we are, in short, is that there's still a lot of confusion and a lot of questions. Obviously, that memo, when it was released, had a lot of confusion for federal assistance programs such as Medicaid. There were questions over whether Medicaid recipients would actually be affected. Now, we did see the White House and the administration seek to clarify and are arguing that they are rescinding just the memo, not the review. They're saying that some of these programs may not take months and months. Some of them may only take a day to review, but there's still a lot of open questions, Zach. But we do know that the White House is saying they are not rescinding the order. They are just rescinding the memo that was facilitating this order.
Well, this move certainly caught a lot of organizations and states that receive these grants off guard, but it's also been catching some Republican senators off guard on Capitol Hill. Tell us more about what's been going on behind the scenes and how are Republican senators reacting to this?
I think Republican senators were pretty thrilled that, this was rescinded because politically this was pretty bad for them, that it was going to affect a lot of their constituents. They were receiving a lot of calls and questions about what does this mean for state programs. So behind the scenes, we know there had been a flurry of action and questions, not a lot of pointed, directed attacks towards the president because he does have a fairly unified caucus within the Senate, but we did certainly see some questions of what does this mean for state programs and what does this mean for recipients.
And as the Senate has been in Washington this week, the House, meanwhile, has been out, and House Republicans have been down in Florida for a retreat at Trump's Doral Resort down near Miami. And they've been discussing Trump's top priorities and these next 2 years of Republican unified control. Obviously, the big question here is a reconciliation package here in the next few months. Where are we at on this front at this point, and do Republicans have a plan here?
Well, I think the goal of this retreat was let's basically find a consensus. We know that Speaker Mike Johnson was really hoping to complete step 1 of this reconciliation process by the end of February so he could move into passing this reconciliation by April. But as we saw coming out of this meeting, there's still a lot of disagreements and they could not exactly get on the same page. So there's a lot of open questions over what happens now, but I don't think they were quite successful in their goal of let's head down to the Trump Doral Resort, come out with a consensus, because there's still a lot of open questions and they still don't have the caucus on board.
And last month, Speaker Johnson said that he was aiming for $2.5 trillion in savings as part of this reconciliation plans. Obviously, Trump has made a lot of talk about tax cuts, actions on the border. How are these various policies impacting the plan here?
It's a good question, because there is a significant part of the Republican caucus that really just wants deficit reduction, and they're looking at a reduction of spending. But several of the president's priorities, including funding a border wall and extending his tax cuts, are quite expensive. We've seen a nonpartisan estimate that over the next 10 years, extending these tax cuts would contribute to the deficit by $4 trillion. So there is a lot of complications because there is a significant part of the Republican caucus that does not want some of these policy proposals to be as expensive as they are. So they're going to have to cut in other ways. And there are questions, particularly from Republican lawmakers, of what other programs this is going to cut into. Will this cut into community programs and state-run programs that really do help their constituents?
All right, that's all I've got. The Hill's Cate Martel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Zach.
Meta has agreed to settle a 2021 Trump lawsuit for $25 million. The lawsuit was filed by President Trump against the social media company after suspending his accounts following the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg visited Trump back in November at his private Florida club. Conversations there kick-started negotiations between the parties. Meta also notably donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee. Zuckerberg himself was also there at the inauguration, among several tech billionaires and CEOs who were there in the Capitol Rotunda. The terms of this settlement were not disclosed in court filings, but a source familiar with the agreement said that the tech giant has agreed to pay $25 million overall. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Zach Schonfeld. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.